The entire team, on the occasion of their film's premiere and its impending success, decided to celebrate. The director, noticing that his actor wasn't drinking, directly inquired why he was still sober. The actor assured that he becomes intoxicated quickly, though others seemed to be enjoying themselves. This was true, but the project was successfully completed largely thanks to him, and everyone was pleased to work with him. Only one person from the team did not wish to continue drinking with everyone, and his name was Kim Jisoo. Seeing this, the lead actor decided to follow, assuring the rest that he needed some fresh air. Meanwhile, Kim Jisoo, already outside, was calmly smoking, realizing that such parties were definitely not for him. At this moment, he felt that he shouldn't have drunk everything that was offered to him. Suddenly, another guest appeared and asked if he was cold. It turned out that the colleague wanted to ask for a cigarette, which is why he approached. The young man readily agreed to share, while the other noted that large gatherings didn't seem to suit him, as he spent most of the time alone. He also shared his lighter, but soon it became clear that it had run out of gas. For this reason, the actor decided to use Kim Jisoo's already lit cigarette. This happened even faster than the man expected. Afterwards, he was left with ambiguous feelings. The smoking was accompanied by an awkward silence between them. The actor broke this silence by noting that Jisoo had drunk a lot, and that it wasn't necessary to drink everything that was offered to him. The protagonist was also surprised that he knew his name, though ultimately, his name was also known since he was the lead actor, whom everyone called Hijevu. In any case, it was remarkable that he knew the entire crew, and now it was clear why everyone liked him. However, the actor denied this statement, as he didn't remember everyone, but he did remember Jisoo. It turned out that the man had seen several of the lead actor's works, and almost all of them were independent documentaries. In any case, he liked those perspectives on things. This statement managed to fluster Jisoo, for which he thanked him. This blush was perceived by the man as something unusual, as he had never seen anything like it before. Moreover, he also recalled the moment when they were watching the finished film. Everyone was carefully examining the finished work and pondering whether they needed another take. And only Jisoo couldn't take his eyes off the screen, and at one point, unconsciously uttered the word snake. A moment later, he added that the actor reminded him of a snake. However, it turned out that he was being asked for his opinion on the movements, and what he said could be taken as an insult. Remembering this, Jisoo still felt awkward. The protagonist explained that sometimes he thinks out loud, which is why he said it without thinking, and it might have sounded foolish. As he said this, he blushed even more, which Hige noticed. In any case, the man intended to give him a chance to explain. Therefore, he directly asked what he meant by the word snake at that time. Without much thought, the protagonist noted that the actor usually played roles of good guys, but it seemed to him that sometimes during filming, a certain coldness would cross his face. It appeared on its own, and yet there was something frightening about it, and it was terrifying. It felt like standing face to face with a giant snake. In any case, Jisoo was a huge fan of his. Suddenly, Hige reminded that he had previously stated that he liked the way the protagonist viewed the world. In fact, he knew a lot, including information about the young worker named Jisoo. For instance, that he was in dire need of money, and so if he wished, something could be done about it. The next day, he arrived at the actor's apartment, but hesitated just before entering. This continued for a while until the apartment owner himself opened the door and inquired why he hadn't called. It turned out he had seen from the window when the guest got out of the taxi and was thus prepared for his arrival. He had also prepared a hot drink, which he offered to his new friend, as it was raining heavily outside. After a brief silence, the man asked if the protagonist liked it there, to which he received an affirmative response. Nevertheless, the conversation needed to be maintained, so the young man decided to bring up their previous discussion. Specifically, the moment when the actor mentioned needing money, wanting to know how he came to that conclusion. After some thought, Hige pointed out that the guest seemed to have many debts that needed to be paid off. How he knew this, the man decided to keep to himself. In any case, if Jisoo had come here, it could be assumed he was interested in the proposal. It was necessary to know if he had ever filmed adult movies. There was no need to worry about this, as it was merely a hobby, but it was important to know if the cameraman had ever done something similar. It was unlikely to be a problem for him, so there were fewer reasons to refuse, especially when the payment was worthy of the job. Somewhat perplexed by this, the protagonist eventually asked who he was supposed to be filming. This question caught the host off guard, so much so that he didn't immediately have an answer. But when his thoughts collected, the man apologized for forgetting. But in the end, Jisoo would only be filming, with just him and his partner on camera, no need to join. However, if the cameraman wanted to join, no one would be against it. Before giving a final answer, the young man asked for some time to think it over. He truly didn't know what to do in this situation, as he really needed the money, but engaging in something like this was hard to consider normal. When asked why him specifically, the employer reminded him that he greatly admired his work, and that reason alone was enough. Moreover, he offered excellent conditions. They would work directly, meaning it would be easy to schedule, and given the nature of the work, all decisions would be up to him. And of course, Jisoo wouldn't be forced into anything. Moreover, they were both gay, so it would be better to work with someone familiar. And most importantly, Jisoo needed the money, making the offer even more appealing. But in any case, it was not so important, as Hyde truly valued the worldviews of his current guest. Hearing all this, the protagonist genuinely pondered whether he could refuse, feeling cornered as if he had no choice but to agree. But it seemed that everything wasn't so bad. Finally, the young man asked if the person with whom the employer planned to film agreed with this arrangement. Hije confirmed this, adding that they would have the chance to meet next time. There were some rules for this job, one of which stated that one should never arrive in their own car. It was necessary to take a taxi, as suspicions could arise, leading to problems. In the end, Jisoo arrived at his place of work, where he was immediately met by the actor. From the shoes at the entrance, it was clear the partner was already inside. After the protagonist arrived, he was made to hand over all his personal belongings and change into provided clothing. He was forced to change under the employer's supervision. After finishing, they proceeded to the designated room where all the equipment was. To Jisoo's surprise, there was a bound man in the room who appeared to be in a poor condition. This person was named Sanil, and the host introduced their new cameraman to him. To facilitate their introduction, the man removed the blindfold from his partner. While they were trying to bring Sanil back to normal, the new workers simply observed. The marks all over his body suggested he had been beaten. This was not a usual occurrence. Eventually, Sanil recovered and decided to introduce himself to the new cameraman. After introducing themselves, the partner began to act more at ease. He mentioned that he had heard a lot about Jisoo and was genuinely curious to find out who he really was. It now became clear that Jisoo was just a kid, so it was necessary to determine if he was truly ready for this. In response, the protagonist calmly indicated that there was no reason to worry, as his job was simply to film. Hige also intervened, asking the partner not to be such a jerk, and noted that their new worker was much more capable than he might seem. Sanil didn't understand such accusations, as he thought he was just greeting him, and asked Hije to stay out of it. However, there was something currently bothering the main character, and it was the fact that his current colleague was sitting on the table, despite there being a chair nearby. The actor supported this notion and also asked the partner to sit down so they could have a proper conversation. Reluctantly, Sanil agreed to sit down calmly. Once everyone was seated, the employer stated that he wanted to use today to get to know each other better. And to start, they introduced themselves once again. Immediately after, Sanil cheerfully shook hands with the new colleague, assuring him that he never thought they would meet like this. Then, the partner wanted to know about the earlier events, his first impression, and if it made him feel anything. The protagonist felt nothing of the sort. Instead, he assured them that there was no need to worry, as he kept his personal life and work separate. But what was more important now was that his hand was being painfully squeezed. For this, the young actor apologized. At that moment, this caused Hige to laugh, asking them not to start. This turned into a friendly argument, during which Jisoo felt out of place and even wanted to go home. After these conversations ended, he headed back in a taxi, asking to be dropped off in the center. Inside, the young man concluded that he hadn't done much, but still felt very tired. Now he was sure that he shouldn't have agreed to something like this from the start. He felt extremely uncomfortable in that atmosphere, so he needed to decide what to do next, possibly even refuse. In the end, the protagonist was brought back to his senses by the driver, who asked him not to bang his head against the window. But there was something reassuring. He only had to work for a month, once a week, resulting in just 4 times in total. Suddenly, he received a message from his employer, apologizing for the somewhat unsettling day. This calmed him down a bit, making him believe that everything would be all right. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Sanel noted that they had just introduced themselves, and it was very boring. In response, Hije pointed out that everything has its time, and in general, the partner could be a bit more careful with his words. While the younger worker noted that their introduction was rather strange, as Jisoo looked like a frightened rabbit, the actor affirmed that it was quite cute. In any case, they needed to ensure that the new worker wouldn't run away from them. Sanil genuinely disliked all of this. Instead, he was asked to get off the table again, as no one liked it. Such behavior angered the partner, so he said he would get dressed and go home. A few seconds later, a message came from Hige stating that they would see each other next week, which satisfied the actor. Once home, the protagonist decided to sit at his computer to find the necessary information. He was now looking at what he would be filming soon. Everything he found so easily made him think that his employer probably didn't want anything so mundane, as there was nothing special or intricate about it. Finding nothing of use, the young man simply sat on the bed. Nevertheless, thoughts about the upcoming job kept him restless, with many questions that no one could answer. And the only thing he knew was that he could do whatever he wanted there. Suddenly, a new message came from the director, asking if the cameraman was going on vacation. Not long before, Haije had suggested making this his only project for a while, for which he would be well paid, as Haije liked to keep everything under control, and there was no need to take on other projects while working on this. There was actually one project Jisoo was signed up for, through his agency, but Haije assured him he would take care of it, so there was no reason to worry. He would arrange it so that the cameraman could return whenever he wanted. This could be considered a vacation. After a brief conversation, the director mentioned that his friend needed a cameraman since his own had fallen ill and offered this job to Jisoo. The protagonist couldn't give a definite answer right now, as he wasn't sure himself. However, the director also added that it wasn't a major shoot and would only last 2 days, so there shouldn't be anything too difficult. This managed to convince him, but the cameraman had conditions that his name wouldn't be credited, and he could only work on non-weekends. In any case, 2 days wouldn't make much of a difference, so there was nothing to worry about. There were more important issues at hand. It was decided to ask his superior where people usually watched adult films, but within a few seconds, he regretted this question. The day of the shoot arrived, and the cameraman began setting up his equipment from the start. However, it bothered him that he was being watched the entire time, and Sanul was running late. While setting up, the employer noted that he had thought the equipment would be better, but Jisoo found it sufficient. The man cheerfully evaluated everything, but added that since he was paying for it all, they could have asked for something better. This statement surprised the young man, as he thought the actor had said it was just a hobby, and if his hobby was spending money, he could buy him a new car. For now, they needed to take a few test shots. Suddenly, after a brief pause, Hajin laughed heartily. He then pointed out that sometimes Jisoo revealed all his thoughts without any filter, which was quite cute. So they asked him now if he really wanted a new car. Caught off guard by his unconsidered words, he could only quickly search for a new topic of conversation. Because of this, Jisoo remarked that he hoped they didn't want to drag him into all this. Haije responded by suggesting that it seemed as though the cameraman himself wanted to join. But the protagonist, of course, refused, though he blushed while doing so. Eventually, Saniel arrived and was immediately asked to stand in the proper place to assess the lighting. However, the partner inquired what was going on, as he had the impression he had interrupted something important. In any case, they could start now. At that moment, Jisoo realized that this person clearly disliked him. As soon as everything began, the protagonist regretted not asking more questions, as it was clearly not a professional shoot of such films. They weren't acting, and he shouldn't have spoiled the mood. Watching all this, the cameraman genuinely didn't understand if he was observing, just filming, or if there was a problem with his presence, and if he should pretend he wasn't there at all. For this reason, Jisoo decided to set a boundary for himself that couldn't be crossed under any circumstances. However, for some reason, he felt that Haije was looking directly at him rather than at his partner. Frankly speaking, the protagonist was anxious because he had to film ordinary people rather than actors. But fortunately, the realization that he was on the other side of the boundary made the shoot less uncomfortable. At one point, the cameraman realized that it actually looked really cool. The next day, the young man met with the director in a cafe. Since their meeting was in a cafe, they decided to have a snack and ordered something more. The man handed over his card to pay and asked to buy a coffee for his friend, who was about to arrive. In time, the drinks were ready. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, signaling a new message. The message turned out to be from Haejin, stating that it seemed the cameraman had forgotten his cap at their place. When asked if he would come to retrieve it, Jisoo realized he was already quite busy today. However, the actor replied, noting that the young man should be free today, so there was no reason to refuse. In any case, there was no time to talk on the phone now, and the timing of the message made him feel as if he was hiding something. At the table, the director decided to recall that party, because at that time it seemed to him that Woo Hee-jae was clearly interested in Jisoo, so he was curious about what was between them. The protagonist couldn't say anything coherent, leading the man to conclude that there really was something between them. Then he remarked that such things are hard to miss, and he had personally seen them both outside. The cameraman, in turn, stated that they had accidentally met when the actor went out for a smoke, and he mentioned something like, "Great job, the guy drank too much," and all that. The elder was pleased to hear this, as he had recently had the impression that something was off with that person. This statement surprised Jisoo, as it seemed to him that the director liked him as an actor, and they communicated quite pleasantly. Without much thought, the man confirmed that Heej was indeed a great actor. Attractive appearance, popularity, and excellent acting skills, plus he was intelligent. Working with him was always easy, but there was something unsettling. a feeling that this person put in a lot of effort to show only his good side. In any case, if nothing had happened, then everything was fine. The director was just worried because Jisoo always seemed to attract some troublemakers, so there was hope that things with that guy were indeed over. With a forced smile on his clearly sad face, the young man confirmed that suspicion. However, the director perfectly understood that Jisoo was not telling him everything. But eventually, the girl they were waiting for arrived. She introduced herself as Pak Saddam and immediately apologized for being late, as the traffic was much heavier than expected. Meanwhile, Hae-jae was still waiting for a reply to his message, and this wait was really irritating him. And after a few minutes, the protagonist was told that his phone was ringing. It was an unknown number, but he had some suspicions about who might be calling. This continued for a while, and the people around him began to worry. Eventually, he muted the phone and told the others that the caller had hung up, but if it was important, they might call again. Their current project was about a stray cat living in a theater district. Workers from 2 theaters started taking care of it, and eventually, the cat considered both theaters its home. At one point, Theater A began using the cat's photos for advertising. They started publishing pictures of the cat with actors backstage, which gained a lot of popularity. Soon, Theater B adopted this marketing strategy as well. Interestingly, these 2 theaters were already competitors. The whole story sounded quite amusing. It was simple but had intriguing details. It had to be admitted that the director really had a knack for finding talents. Eventually, the woman confessed that the work was almost done. They just needed a few additional shots and something for the credits. Unfortunately, their cameraman had injured his leg. The elder mentioned that he thought of Jisoo as soon as he saw this project and decided to propose it to him. After all, he handled the camera well and animals liked him. When they first met, the man was teaching at the university where Jisoo was studying, during a lecture on outdoor filming. That day, the students were unusually embarrassed for some reason. The professor arrived and wanted to know what was going on. It turned out that Jisoo was napping on a bench, just as if he were at home, with a cat peacefully sitting on him. As soon as he woke up, the cat hurriedly left its warm spot. Seeing this, the professor asked if he intended to catch it. However, the student said it wasn't his cat, but seemed to be a stray. At that moment, the cat was back on his lap. It became a perfect photo opportunity. Now, Pak Saddam was very touched by this story, while the man pointed out that he had a soft spot for intriguing people, and when they met, Jisoo was still a student, so he began keeping an eye on him. Many knew that his dog didn't like strangers, but after just a few hours, it was peacefully sleeping in the young man's arms. And when they went to the countryside, he was entrusted with collecting eggs from the henhouse, and the chickens only trusted him. Hearing this, the woman was even more delighted, as it meant his skills would be very useful for filming the cat. So it was time to discuss their schedule, as the young man mentioned he couldn't work on weekends. In the end, everything was settled, and all they had to do was wait for the first working day. Left alone, the protagonist suddenly realized he still hadn't checked the message. Hae-jae had asked him to call on his way, which clearly meant he wanted things to go his way. Although he paid well, it was still a bit much. Eventually, he needed to end this. Since the man had given his number, it probably wouldn't hurt to call now. Finally, after a brief pause, the person on the other end picked up the phone. The man wanted to know if he would come so he could plan dinner for one more person, and since it was his birthday, he hoped he wouldn't be left alone. And soon enough, the protagonist found himself back at the apartment. The man was glad to see his worker, who had even brought a cake for the occasion. In the kitchen, Jisoo asked if Hae-jae liked to cook, but the host denied it, adding that he had cooked steaks once or twice, so not to expect a masterpiece. But this time, it seemed to turn out pretty well. The dish indeed looked quite good. The man noted that he had also chosen a good wine to compensate for the terrible cooking. In the end, the protagonist couldn't resist something so delicious and sincerely thanked him for it. However, there was something bothering him. Was it okay for Hae-jae to be having dinner with him on his birthday instead of with someone special? But the actor didn't know anyone else to invite, as no one came to mind. The guest suggested that someone as popular as him should have friends, or at least Sanil. However, it turned out he and his filming partner weren't that close. This statement puzzled the young man, as he was sure they were dating, considering what they were doing together. The man then mentioned that it wasn't much fun, as he hadn't planned anything for his birthday. So if he received a present now, it might make things better. After some time, Pak Saddam went out for dinner with a friend again, where they ordered a lot of delicious food. It was a beautiful setting, and at one moment she thought it would be nice if Siju were there too, but he was pressed for time. So she hoped that soon everything would settle down, and since they had to start work tomorrow, they needed to enjoy the present day. However, the man was somewhat wary about his subordinate, as that reaction had been very strange. It was unclear what could have intrigued Hyge about him. If you think about it, Hyge also took a break after the shoot. It was unlikely to be a coincidence, especially since Jisoo had no reason to take a vacation. His current table companion noticed his pensive expression, and he explained that he was thinking about Jisoo, as he had a weakness for beautiful faces. Meanwhile, the protagonist was visibly surprised when told about the gift, as he had been the one invited here. His face clearly showed that he thought Hyge was overstepping his bounds. Jisoo bluntly stated that he had nothing for him right now, and the actor could always just take what he wanted. But the host suggested that the gift could be something only he could give. He also promised that it wouldn't be difficult, leaving fewer reasons to refuse. Eventually, they both went to the guest room, where the projector was. They continued drinking wine, not even noticing how much they had consumed. It turned out that Hyge always wanted to watch movies with a friend until the early hours. This made the young man curious why he hadn't done so before. The host had always thought about it, but it never worked out, and now he had no one to invite, while Jisoo seemed like someone who did such things all the time. He didn't know if it was the wine, but watching famous scenes from a great film, comfortably nestled next to a warm shoulder, wasn't so bad. The second movie of the evening captured the young man's interest even more than the first. Since Hyge showed no particular interest, the protagonist directly asked if he had already seen it. Without much thought, the man confirmed the suspicion, noting that he had seen it well over a dozen times, though he had never actually counted. After that, he similarly asked the guest, assuming he had asked because he loved it. The protagonist, having finished his wine, confirmed this, saying he had watched it even more than Hyge, and called the host a buddy. This sudden change in behavior puzzled the actor. The previously quiet and modest Jisoo was now allowing himself more freedom and appeared very relaxed, something he had never shown before. This made the man inquire if everything was all right, as they had already drunk quite a lot. So, it might be a good idea to have a bite to eat. At this point, the protagonist was no longer thinking clearly and didn't find anything strange about the suggestion. Unfortunately, just then, Hyge's guest received a phone call. It was a call at 1 in the morning, and Jisoo seemed unwilling to answer. However, from his expression, it was clear that the person on the other end could upset him. The host noticed this immediately, and since he was being questioned, wanted to ask something as well. Specifically, he was interested in that call. At that moment, Jisoo suddenly became flustered and remarked that Hyge should already know everything about him. So he asked if the actor had been inquiring about him, his schedule, debts, and even the fact that he was gay. As soon as this was said, the man stood up and turned off the projector. He then lit a cigarette in the apartment, asking if that had angered him. In response, the protagonist asked if he had gotten angry and said no. Would there still have been these questions? Ultimately, Hyge apologized for everything, admitting he hadn't found out much, just some loose ends in paperwork that were easy to trace. As for Jisoo being gay, it was just a lucky guess, as he sometimes gave himself away. And judging by his reaction, it was easy to guess who was actually calling. It was probably the person who got the young man into debt. In reply, the protagonist admitted that talking about it made him uncomfortable, and he wished they wouldn't cross that line. This request somewhat surprised the actor, as he only wanted to help. Frankly, the cameraman should understand that he was being paid an absurd amount. It was foolish and naive to think he could get away with just 4 shoots. The employer was paying several times more than it was worth, so he didn't think that a little curiosity was crossing the line. Jisoo, in turn, stated that he wasn't naive, just trying to think reasonably. However, the man didn't agree, as they were clearly not engaging in something ordinary, and their relationship was not typical. The protagonist decided to be honest with himself, admitting that his words were true. He genuinely didn't want to worry anymore, so he focused on repaying the debt. It was all true, and anyone might find it strange. He was truly tired of groveling and was afraid of making the same foolish mistakes again. He didn't understand why he always had to worry about such things. Eventually, the young man began fighting these thoughts, reassuring himself that Hyge was just joking. Nothing serious had happened, and the alcohol had just made him too emotional. Seeing this reaction, Hyge wanted to comfort the guest and confirmed that he was only joking and it shouldn't be taken so seriously. Jisoo, unable to hold back his thoughts, directly asked what Hyge was doing with him. The actor assured him that he would never do anything harmful to him. After all, if their agreement was discovered, Hyge would be the first to suffer, and if society found out they were gay, he would lose much more. Besides, Jisoo was hired solely to film personal movies, so it was understandable that he should be the one worried. The cameraman had no reason to worry, and most importantly, Hyge was nothing like him. In the end, the protagonist withdrew from the comforting hand and stated that he needed to leave. Despite being asked to stay because it was late, the young man insisted that he had to go, and that a taxi would take him wherever he needed. The man still hoped to convince the guest to stay the night since they had a shoot the next day. but since the shoot was in the evening, Jisoo saw no problem. Ultimately, the actor was left alone, clearly dissatisfied. Already in the car, the protagonist continued to feel uncomfortable about what had happened and what he had said. He wished the next day wouldn't come, but it did nonetheless. The cameraman caught himself thinking he was unusually distracted today, and it was true. While the actors were getting ready for the shoot, Hyde reminded him about the cap, asking him not to forget it this time. It also turned out that the man had bought something special for his partner this time. They decided to continue from where they had left off last time. First, the eyes needed to be blindfolded, and the hands needed to be tied, just like last time. Also, just in case, the cameraman was informed that they would use the words please and enough as safety signals, so there was no need to worry about that. Finally, the scene began, and the cameraman could only ensure that the filming proceeded without problems. Despite being busy, the lead actor kept glancing at Jisoo from the corner of his eye. At one point, Hyde took out an object from his backpack, which turned out to be a timer. Since they had a no cell phones rule, he had to improvise. He couldn't check the time, and the timer had 3 alerts. When the third alert went off, Hyde would come and release him. If he finished early, he would be punished, but if he lasted, he would be rewarded. Saniel wasn't very pleased about being left alone again. However, this time Siju would also be present. Before leaving, Hyde gently informed him that he was leaving everything in his hands. But before that, he needed to hand him something. These were remotes for some devices that he needed to test. It didn't matter what Saniel said. He wasn't to respond. When the timer rang, he could start using the devices, and if he could make the actor give up, he would get a prize. Though it would be hard to do with such small toys, he could torment him until he started rubbing against the bed. In the end, Jisoo pointed out that he thought he was there just to film. However, the employer noted that he could do it right from his spot, which is why they bought wireless devices specifically for him. All of this seemed like an invisible line he had drawn for himself. In any case, the man reminded him that he was being paid for this, and in his opinion, there shouldn't be any problems. Meanwhile, the bound Saniel began to genuinely worry about his fate, asking what they were whispering about and if they really intended to leave him alone here. But no one was going to answer him now. Once everything was clarified, Hyde joyfully prepared to leave. Finally, the man left the room, and the protagonist pondered what he should do next. San-el, hearing no response, concluded that his partner had fled, so he turned to the cameraman, who was supposed to be there. He had no choice but to obey the employer and wait as planned. The actor eventually got angry because no one answered him, knowing he would be untied after the third alert, so he could only wait. About 20 minutes passed, and the protagonist wondered what the set intervals were. Doing nothing, it felt like time was standing still, and Saniel's hands were likely to fall asleep. Unpleasant thoughts began to creep into his mind, such as that this wasn't what he had signed up for, and this was not a simple shoot, so it was time to set things straight. However, in that case, he might say the same thing as before. Suddenly, the sound of the timer snapped him out of his thoughts, signaling the first of 3 alerts. Now the only question remained whether to press the switch and follow the man's lead.